In this nugget, we get to take a look at the concept of vSAN fault domains and then how to actually implement them inside of vSphere. Let's begin. As we know, vSAN can be terrific. However, if we have multiple racks of ESXi hosts, for example, rack 1, rack 2, and rack 3, or if we have multiple chassis with multiple blade servers that are supporting the ESXi host functionality, what normally is also in place is some redundancy. So for example, for rack 1, we probably have power for side A and side B for fault tolerance. We probably have network connectivity for side A and side B. However, if those solutions fail, we could actually lose a whole rack, or a whole chassis as the case may be, of ESXi hosts. And if we had a virtual machine, let's say we have VM-9, and VM9's files were being stored on a virtual storage area network, if it so happened that it was this ESXi host and this ESXi host and this ESXi host that were providing the storage as part of vSAN for VM9, and this whole rack goes out, VM9 is out of luck. So a solution that can help protect against an entire rack failure is called vSAN fault domains. And here's how it works. We identify a group of ESXi hosts that are in a fault domain, so we define it. So let's imagine that this rack has ESXi hosts 1 through 8, and rack 2 has ESXi hosts of 9 through 16, and rack 3 has ESXi hosts 17 through 24. So what we could do is we could create 3 separate fault domains, and we could label them, for example, A, B, and C for fault domains. Then we could put ESXi host 1 through 8 as a part of that fault domain A, and 9 through 16 as a part of fault domain B, and 17 through 24 as a part of fault domain C. And the question may come up, well, how's that going to help us? If we provision a new machine, for example, VM-9, or we do a migration of its data files over to the vSAN supported by these 3 racks, as vSphere replicates the data files for VM9, it's going to make sure it's not going to use 2 hosts in the same fault domain. So for example, it can have some of the information here, and some here. And then if we lose a rack, for example, rack A, the redundancy involved as part of vSAN can tolerate a single failure, which would be the host in this rack, rack 1, and can still support the vSAN with the remaining ESXi resources in fault domain B and C. And in our lab environment, by default, each of our hosts is in a single fault domain by itself. So to configure the fault domains, we're going to do it at the cluster level, at the cluster where vSAN is enabled. And after we have it set up, it'll ensure that no 2 replicas are stored in the same fault domain. And also, if we do have a failure, for example, of a host, let's say it's this one right here, that fails in fault domain A, vSAN is also going to consider all of the other hosts in that fault domain as failed. And because vSAN has been keeping replicas spread out evenly across our fault domains, the hosts in the 2 remaining fault domains should still be able to support the vSAN. So here in the vSphere web client, we've logged on as administrator at nuggetlab.com. And because we configure the vSAN fault domains at the cluster level, let's go ahead on the left with the Host and Clusters tab selected and click on Cluster-1. From here, if we click on the Monitor tab right here, and we click on vSAN right here, we have some options regarding vSAN that we can look at. For example, if we click on Capacity and give that a moment to refresh, here it shows us the capacity overview and use capacity breakdown. If we click on Physical Disks, it can let us know exactly which resources each of the ESXi hosts have contributed to make this vSAN. And if we want to create and use fault domains, the way we'd create those is we can click on the Configure tab for the cluster. And then under the vSAN section, we have lots of options regarding vSAN, including General. So under General, we can verify that vSAN is turned on, the deduplication and compression is disabled, the encryption is disabled. If we wanted to modify those parameters, we can click on Edit and change them right here. If we click on Disk Management underneath vSAN, it's showing us the disks that have been contributed from each ESXi host. If we click on one of the ESXi hosts down at the bottom, it'll show the details on those disks. And what we want to do is take a look at the fault domains. So under vSAN, if we click on Fault Domains and Stretched Cluster, here in the Fault Domain section, it's currently indicating that we can support 1 host failure. And by default, each host is in its own individual fault domain. And also, with only 3 hosts, we don't really need to create separate fault domains and put each of our ESXi hosts in them because we're going to have the same result. However, when we have dozens of hosts all contributing to vSAN, that's the time we'd want to make sure that we create fault domains based on rack or the chassis, and then add the ESXi host in that rack or in that chassis to that fault domain. So if we wanted to create 3 new fault domains, what we could do is right here under fault domains, click on the plus symbol to create a new fault domain. So we'll click on the plus symbol, and let's call this first one rack A. And we'll add ESXi1 to that. We'll click on OK. Click on the plus symbol. We'll call this rack B. And with ESXi2 selected, we'll click OK. And then we'll create our third one as well. So we'll click on the plus symbol. We'll call this one rack C. We'll put a check in the checkbox so that ESXi3 is going to belong to that fault domain. Click on OK. And we're set. So now we have 3 fault domains with 1 host each. And if we had multiple hosts that were in one geographic location or in one rack or one chassis, we could add those hosts to the respective fault domains so that vSAN could do a better job of deciding where to replicate the data across the vSAN and avoid replicating any data in the same exact fault domain. And by avoiding putting replicas of data in the same fault domain, we can lose an entire fault domain and still have our vSAN supported and functioning. In this nugget, we've taken a look at the purpose of fault domains and how to create them and add ESXi hosts to them. And I would encourage you to reinforce what we've learned together in this nugget by using the provided hands-on labs. So I'll see you in the next video. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.